Welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarago and I am here to answer the question, what is Genshin Impact really about? Now, despite what some literary snobs may have you believe, Genshin Impact is actually a literary work of merit. And I'm here today not to defend that claim, because as the world evolved into modernity, we've moved past tomes and books as the only ways to experience stories. A long time ago. I mean, just last year, Clear Obscure Expedition 33 captured the hearts and minds of millions, drawing players into a story contemplating tragedy, grief, and the various ways people deal with that. And before that, Baldur's Gate 3 enamored players with compelling characters and dynamic storytelling, as it gave players meaningful choices to explore fully fleshed out endings and the themes of blind obedience, allegiance, obsession, and many more. These themes used to be explored through the works of Mark Twain, Shakespeare, and Alice Walker. However, technology has advanced far enough that we now have many different ways, and maybe some even better ways of experiencing a story. From words on a page, to paintings and sculptures, to film, and now to interactive gaming experiences. The goal has always been the same. We tell stories to soothe ourselves, to find common ground with one another, and to illuminate the human condition. And in that way, Genshin Impact is no different. A literary work uses literary elements and literary devices to create meaning. And I want to start by saying all of that because I need to communicate that this video is not really about recapping the lore of Genshin, but rather analyzing the lore in a literary analysis. So if you've ever taken AP English in high school, this one's for you. But I promise, it won't be a grueling project. Let's begin by stating that Genshin Impact is a very unique game, not in its premise or storytelling alone, but in the very fact that this game could not have existed in any other time in history but today. I mean, for those who don't know, Genshin Impact is a Chinese-made game. This is one of the first games of its kind to garner worldwide recognition, especially in an industry that for a long time was dominated by Japanese studios, with titles like Super Mario, Final Fantasy, and Pokemon. And this is very noteworthy because a Chinese-made game, as obvious as it may sound, will carry Chinese sentiment, just as Japanese, American, or European games will do. So Genshin Impact is a great way for us to understand how one of the world's biggest economies and largest countries sees the world at large. What do they think about? What do they value? And what do they struggle with? And I'm not saying the writers of Genshin Impact represent the ideas and thoughts of all Chinese people, because no one nation is ever truly a monolith. But the game does give us a glimpse of how its writers view things like governance, love, friendship, knowledge, history, and many other human themes, all packaged in a free-to-play game accessible worldwide. And I think it was Nina Simone who said, "An artist's duty is to reflect the times." And if that's true, then Genshin Impact deserves to be read seriously, or at least played seriously, because beneath the anime visuals and the gacha game mechanics is a story deeply concerned with the anxieties of our time. I mean, themes of power, authority, rebellion, knowledge, and whether people can be trusted with their own destiny. And so now we make it to the titled purpose of the video. Why Genshin Impact deserves to be treated as a literary masterpiece, not because it has a lot of lore, but because its lore is organized around symbols, questions, and conflicts that reveal something very relevant about the human condition today. I think fundamentally, Genshin is trying to answer a question. Can people be trusted to govern themselves? Or do they need this authority beyond themselves to keep them safe? So let's start unwrapping this masterpiece by looking at recurring symbols the game keeps coming back to after almost 6 years of service. For the sake of this video though, I'm only going to focus on like 3 major symbols because otherwise we'll be here forever. The Abyss, the Heavenly Principles, and our twin. I'll talk about the allegory and Irminsul tree as well because the way Genshin handles memory and history is another major reason I think the game deserves to be read seriously. Alright, so let's dive right in. First is the Abyss. In the game, there are those capable of using abyssal energy, and there is this whole faction dedicated to furthering its use called the Abyssal Order. I want to spend a little bit of time covering this energy because even if you've never played Genshin Impact, this symbol will do a lot of the literary work. The Abyss is not just some dark energy or evil energy, it represents forbidden knowledge, and knowledge that gives power, but also corrupts the world around it. And forbidden knowledge appears a lot in our own mythologies when you think about Prometheus stealing fire from Mount Olympus and giving it to humans. Zeus didn't like that. When you think about Adam and Eve eating the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, God did not like that either. They were banished from paradise. So there is this repeated mythological pattern where knowledge is powerful, but it's also dangerous. And authority does not always want the created to have access to this knowledge. And Genshin takes a lot of inspiration from that pattern. In Tevat, the Abyss is seen as a sort of corruption. It has a lot of power, but it also has the capacity to contaminate and decay its users. And just like a computer virus, it has a way of spreading like a sort of cancer. So what does that symbolize? Well, given Genshin's Gnostic inspiration, the Abyss can symbolize knowledge or power that the ruling order does not want humanity to have access to. In Gnostic mythology, there is often this figure called the Demiurge, a lesser creator or a false god who keeps creation trapped, while true salvation comes from knowledge that connects people back to the original source. I'm not going to turn the video into a full Gnosticism lecture because we would be here forever. But that basic structure matters. There is a ruler of the world, there is forbidden knowledge, and there is a question of whether that forbidden knowledge is evil or whether it is only forbidden because it threatens the ruler's control. And that is exactly why the Abyss is so interesting in Genshin. The Abyss does not really exist in our world, so its symbolism is flexible. It can symbolize greed, pride, lust, or any other cardinal sin taken to the extreme, especially because the foremost villains of the story are literally called sinners in Genshin Impact. It also symbolizes knowledge, capable of destroying a nation, like maybe the knowledge to create a nuclear weapon. And the point is not that the Abyss equals one specific thing in real life. The point is that the Abyss represents power that is forbidden because, again, it corrupts the world. At least that is how Tevat's ruling order wants you to look at it. So second, I want to talk about the heavenly principles. Genshin's name translates really close to the original god or the primordial one, depending on how you interpret it. And given all of the emphasis on the heavenly principles and their laws, it's easy to equate the original god with the heavenly principles. But that may be red herring, actually. Because to put it simply, only the heavenly principles is the authority in Tevat. They're framed as the one who created the new world order that the traveler is living through. They protect creation and keep the world from falling apart. And the only thing that they really ask for is for you not to use the Abyss. That's it. However, in the most recent trailer featuring Nicole, she emphasizes that the heavenly principle is not omnipotent or omniscient. In fact, they are quite afraid. And because they are afraid, they are prone to making decisions that stem from fear instead of wisdom. Not exactly what you would want in an omnipotent god or leader. So let's talk about Nicole. In Nicole's case, this truth has to be sealed away as she gives up her voice as punishment for another angel's wrongdoing. If you don't know the lore, I promise you, play Genshin Impact, you'll know about it. It's interesting. So the heavenly principles symbolizes authority that is flawed but powerful, benevolent but not all-knowing, and generous, yes, but very punitive. In a way, the heavenly principles represents any and all governing bodies around the world. And I do not mean one specific government, I mean authority itself. I mean the state, the church, schools, families, any institution that claims it is protecting people by limiting what they are allowed to know or what they're allowed to do. And a lot of governing bodies start with good intentions. They want order, they want safety, they want stability, but power has a way of justifying itself. And at some point, the question becomes, are they protecting people or are they protecting their own control? And that is the tension that the heavenly principles introduces. Now we're coming up to the third one, our twin. Our twin acts as a foil to us. What I love about Genshin Impact is that it specifically makes it so that it does not matter which twin you play as. Whether you choose Lumine or Ether, They are quite literally interchangeable. What the game is giving you is two people with the same origin, the same bond, and essentially the same starting point, but one of them has gone through the journey we are currently going through, and they have already reached the end of it. And in the end, they concluded that leading the Abyssal Order in rebellion against the heavenly principles is the right thing to do. So our twin represents the path we might have taken had we just been placed in time and into that sooner. Had we awakened sooner, but we didn't. We woke up at least like 500 years later. So this twin, put simply, symbolizes the very human tendency to come to a very different conclusion based on one's experience. The game makes them interchangeable, especially in quests like Caribert, where you see the twins' journey in a way that makes it very clear that Ether and Lumine are not morally different species. Given the same exact experience, they would likely choose the same path, but the game separates them by at least 500 years, which sets the stage for two equal beings, neither morally higher than the other, to experience two different paths. Hence, the game is hinting that no path either twin chooses is automatically right or wrong. Their choices are informed by their experiences. And I think that's very human. One of the things we forget in debates, especially online, is that people often ask, how could you ever think that? And the answer is usually, well, because they went through the experiences that they went through. That does not justify every bad take. It does not excuse every harmful action, but it does explain how two people can start from the same place and end up with completely different conclusions. Two siblings can grow up in the same family, for example, and one can end up loving that family while the other ends up resenting it. They live in the same house, but they did not necessarily experience the same life. And that is what the twin represents. And this is why the conflict in Genshin is so interesting, and it's more interesting than good twin versus evil twin. The twin is not simply wrong because they oppose the heavenly principles, and the traveler is not automatically right because we are the protagonist. The story is asking us to understand how experience shapes morality. Now, lastly, another literary device that Genshin uses a lot is allegory. When I think of allegory in Genshin, I have to think about Irminsul, the tree that functions almost like a giant computer or archive for the world. Irminsul keeps records of everything. It stores the memory of the world, and those records feed back into how the world understands itself. So if you change something in Irminsul, it changes the perception and memory of the entire world. We see this with Greater Lord Rukkhadevata and Lesser Lord Kusanali. After the Archon quest, Rukkhadevata is erased from existence, and the world changes. Like, the world's memory changes. People do not remember who Rukkhadevata was. The record shifts, and all they remember is Lesser Lord Kusanali. In other words, history itself becomes rewritten. To me, Irminsul is one of Genshin's clearest symbol of historical revision. History is not the past itself. History is the record of the past. We did not live 500 years ago or 2,000 years ago. We only know what survives through records, stories, archives, monuments, and books. So if those records are altered at their core, our perception of history changes altogether. And that is what the Irminsul represents. It is not just a magical tree, it is a system of record keeping. And because it is tied to the world's order, it also becomes a system of control. If the heavenly principles symbolizes the governing authority, then Irminsul symbolizes the archive that authority depends on. Whoever controls the record controls the story, and whoever controls the story controls what people believe is possible. And this is where the allegory becomes very important. Genshin uses allegory as a loophole. If direct records can be changed, then stories become a way to preserve truth indirectly. I mean, we see this in Wanderer's story quest, right? When the world forgets Scaramouche, his story survives not through a direct record, but through an allegory. Instead of saying his name directly, the story Nahida comes up with is that he becomes this black cat. It becomes symbolic, it becomes indirect, and because of that, the truth survives. And that is so interesting. That is a very interesting idea, and because in real life, allegory has also been used in the same way. When people cannot say the truth directly, They hide it in stories. They change names. They use animals. They use kingdoms. They use gods. They use fantasy. They say something without saying it directly, and sometimes that is the only reason the truth survives. So when Nicole records things through allegory, in fact, her basic attack actually says allegoria. I love it. But when Genshin uses symbolic stories to preserve hidden truths, the game is not just being mysterious for the sake of being mysterious. It is making a literary argument about memory, censorship, and the fragility of history. Truth does not always survive because someone wrote it down plainly. Sometimes truth survives because someone was clever enough to disguise it. Otherwise, the governing body might have persecuted and deleted that record, That's why Genshin's use of allegory matters a lot. When you put all of this together, the Abyss, the Heavenly Principles, the Twin, Irminsul, and allegories, they are all pointing towards the same central question. The Abyss asks what happens when people access power the authority says you shouldn't have. The Heavenly Principles ask when does protection become control? Our Twin ask, would we make the same choices if we had lived through the same suffering? And Irminsul ask, who controls history when memory itself can be rewritten? The allegories ask, how does the truth survive when direct speech is no longer safe? That is why I think Genshin Impact deserves to be treated as a literary masterpiece. Not because it has a lot of lore, not because it has millions of players worldwide, and not because it has hidden books and world quests and item descriptions that only 3 people on Reddit have read, but because all of that lore is organized around symbols, questions, and conflicts that reveal something very, very relevant to the human condition today. At its core, to me, Genshin is asking, can people be trusted with their own destiny? Or do they need the heavy hand of authority to guide them? And maybe the more uncomfortable version of the question is, even if authority is fraud, afraid, punitive, and not all-knowing, is it still necessary? And there's a real tension there. Because if the Heavenly Principles is wrong, then rebellion becomes understandable. But if the Abyss is truly dangerous, then rebellion may not be enough. And if history itself can be rewritten, then maybe the fight is not just over power, but over truth. So when people ask, what is Genshin really about? I don't think the answer is simply gods, dragons, nations, and a lost sibling. Genshin is about freedom and control. It is about memory and censorship. It is about whether people can be trusted with dangerous truths. It is about whether authority can protect without becoming tyrannical. And it is about whether 2 people can walk the same path at different times and become enemies because history happened to them differently. And that is why I think the story matters. And in the follow-up video, I want to take this framework to its natural conclusion. If this is what Genshin has been asking all along, then what kind of ending would actually answer it? And because the ending will not just be a plot twist, it will be the story's final answer to its central question. Can Teyvat grow up, or will the gods never let go? You made it to the end of yet another video of mine. Thank you so much for listening. I know it does seem like I'm overthinking everything, but this is what's interesting to me. I really do enjoy Genshin because of all of this literary elements that reflect back our own experiences in the real world to us. And so if you like this kind of video, please consider subscribing so that you won't miss the next one. And you can continue following me through this journey of literary exploration through video games. All right, that's it for today. Bye.